This isn't just another video on manifestation. This is about the one truth Neville Goddard considered the cornerstone of everything: assumption. The silent power working behind the scenes. The quiet force that doesn't need permission, rituals, or repeated affirmations. It simply is. And here's the truth bomb that changes everything. The reason life looks the way it does is because it was assumed it would. That assumption hardened into fact. Not loudly, not dramatically, not in a moment of clarity during a meditation or after writing 55 by 5 affirmations, but in the soft, unguarded, casual moments when the mind wasn't even paying attention. In the sigh that said, "It always turns out this way for me." In the flinch when the phone buzzed because it was probably bad news again. In the shrug of, "It's just how life is." That was the assumption. And the universe, it said yes. People say all the right things. I'm abundant. I'm loved. I'm magnetic. But that's not what the universe hears. The universe doesn't respond to words. It responds to states. And states are born from assumptions. Deep, natural, unquestioned ideas of what's real. The thoughts that don't get noticed, not because they're silent, but because they feel normal. There's someone out there affirming wealth every morning and still choosing the cheapest item on the menu without thinking. There's someone visualizing a loving relationship but assumes, deep down, that people always leave. Not because they want to, but because they've quietly lived it so many times, it just feels like truth. The mistake isn't the desire. The mistake is believing the old assumption still holds power just because it feels familiar. Assumption is not about effort. It's about acceptance. And what's accepted, without resistance, without question, without needing to be repeated, becomes fact. The world is a mirror, and it reflects not what is wanted, but what is accepted as true. What if the 3D isn't mocking anyone? What if it's already delivering perfectly, exactly what was unconsciously assumed? There's someone saying, "I'm chosen," but still flinching every time someone pulls away. Still watching the phone, waiting for the message that doesn't come, wondering if they're good enough. That's not the universe ignoring desire. That's the universe obeying assumption. The quiet assumption of being overlooked. The subtle belief that maybe this time won't be different. And that assumption, not the affirmation, is what gets expressed. Neville said it so clearly: the world is yourself pushed out. It doesn't lie. It doesn't delay. It reflects. And that reflection is based on the assumption that lives beneath the surface. If the outside doesn't change, it's not because the teachings aren't working. It's because the assumption hasn't changed. And that's not a failure. That's a map. Because if assumption created the problem, assumption also holds the power to undo it. And this is where most people get stuck, not because they're incapable, but because they don't realize they're still responding to what they see instead of persisting in what they've chosen to believe. They say the words, they recite the affirmations, but underneath, there's still that old familiar doubt quietly running the show. There's still a part of them that's waiting for proof before it believes, rather than believing as if it's already true. But the shift doesn't happen through waiting. It happens through assuming differently now, regardless of what the 3D says. It means deciding, over and over, to occupy the version of self that no longer needs reassurance, because it already knows. Not hoping, not trying, knowing. The 3D isn't the guide, it's the echo. Change the assumption, and the echo follows. Most people aren't living in the now. They're living in a memory, a pattern, a recycled version of the same belief wearing new clothes. I always get ghosted. I'm never the first choice. I have to work hard for money. These aren't facts. They're stories. Old assumptions that never got questioned, so they just kept getting played out. And here's where it gets powerful. No one has to keep playing a story just because it once felt true. The story of rejection, struggle, or invisibility only continues when it keeps being assumed. And most don't even realize they're assuming it. That's how sneaky the subconscious can be. It clings to a familiar belief, calls it reality, and then builds life around it. Changing this isn't about saying a new affirmation louder. It's about stepping out of the old costume, refusing to identify as the one who waits, chases, hopes, and doubts. Because reality has no choice but to mirror the self. And the self is defined by what is assumed to be true. And the beautiful thing is, the moment you see the pattern, you're no longer fully trapped in it. Awareness cracks the illusion. When you can witness the thought without immediately believing it, you're already shifting. When you pause and say, "Wait, is this actually true? Or is this just something I've accepted for so long that it feels true?" That's the beginning of freedom. That's when you start choosing again. And you don't have to feel 100% convinced at first. You just have to stop feeding the old version. Let it starve. Starve it of your attention, your reactions, your identification. And then feed the new, gently, consistently, with patience. Assumption is a habit, and habits shift with repetition. The new reality begins the moment you dare to see yourself differently. The reason it still feels stuck, even after doing all the right things, is because the state hasn't shifted. The identity hasn't shifted. 1,000 affirmations can't move the needle if the base assumption is still rooted in lack, fear, or unworthiness. This isn't punishment, it's precision. The subconscious delivers with frightening accuracy, not what is wanted, but what is believed to be real. There's an inner voice asking, "But I've been saying I'm rich and loved every day. Why do I still wake up anxious?" The answer is not in the saying, it's in the being. If the wealth is still seen as out there, if love is still something to chase or earn, then the assumption is still, "I'm without it." Neville taught that imagining creates reality. But imagination must be embodied, not observed. There's a difference between looking at a dream from a distance and stepping inside it as if it's already real. One is wishing, the other is assuming, and only one gets expressed. Most people try to change their life from the outside in, not realizing that true change always begins within. They rearrange circumstances, try new techniques, switch methods, hoping for a different reflection, but the mirror never lies. The mirror only reflects. Until the inner self wears a new assumption, the outer won't shift. It's not about effort. It's about alignment. Not about proving worth, but knowing it. The shift happens when one no longer tries to become the version they want, but decides they are that version now. It's subtle, but it's everything. It's a quiet certainty that doesn't need evidence to feel true. The moment you stop needing proof is the moment you become it. And the 3D, always obedient, follows. Not because you forced it, but because you finally aligned with it. Feeling stuck doesn't mean something's wrong. It just means the assumption hasn't changed yet. And the beauty of this truth is that it doesn't care about how long the old story ran. It doesn't care how many times the pattern played out. The moment a new assumption is claimed, truly, quietly, deeply, the whole game changes. What if the 3D is not a punishment, but a perfect record keeper? Not showing failure, but showing the last assumption made. Not saying, "You can't have it," but whispering, "This is what you said yes to when no one was looking." And what if that's not tragic, but freeing? Because if assumption made this version of reality, then something new can be assumed. Right now, not with struggle, not with force, but with calm, grounded, inner knowing. The kind of knowing that doesn't need to be proven because it already feels true. This is the quiet power behind every shift, not noise, not begging, but decision. A silent inner click that says, "This is who I am now." And when that happens, there's no need to wait for evidence. The change is internal first. The 3D only echoes it. It may take time to rearrange, but the shift is done the moment it's assumed. That's why nothing outside needs to be fixed. Not the person, not the situation, not the past. Only the assumption. That's the root. And once that root is touched and moved, everything else follows. It's not magic, it's law. The law of assumption works not because of effort, but because of consistency and identity. And the best part, no one else has to believe it. No one else has to agree. Reality bends quietly to the one who dares to see themselves differently and persist. Neville said, "You are the operant power." That means reality doesn't operate independently. It doesn't decide who wins, who gets love, who receives abundance. You do, through assumption, through identity, through what is quietly accepted as true. There's no waiting, no earning, no deserving. The mirror only reflects. It cannot delay. The only delay is in the self, when the old assumption is still being worn like a second skin. But the moment the skin is shed, the moment a new version is claimed with simplicity and finality, the world rearranges to match. And it's not magic, it's law. The truth is, no one is being ignored by the universe. The universe is responding, perfectly, faithfully, relentlessly, to the assumption already being made. And that assumption, it's in every reaction, every expectation, every casual thought when no one's watching. It's in how you respond when things don't go your way. It's in what you secretly believe when you see someone else succeed. It's in the quiet doubt that creeps in at night, the hesitation before fully claiming what's yours. That's the real assumption, not the words said once or twice in a journal, but the identity lived in, moment to moment. This is why conscious creation is not about controlling the outside. It's about becoming radically honest with the inside. It's about noticing the subtle ways the old self still lingers, and choosing not to play along anymore. Choosing, again and again, to step into the new. Not because you saw proof, but because you decided to be the proof. The world will always keep up. It has no choice. When you shift, everything shifts. That's the power of assumption. That's the truth Neville pointed to. You are the cause, and reality is simply the echo. There's something deeply empowering in all this. Because once the illusion of nothing's working is cracked, the real power can rise. The power to choose again, to assume again, to become again. Assume it's easy. Assume it's done. Assume you are already chosen, already rich, already safe, already enough, not because it's being begged for, but because it's already true in imagination. And imagination, when fully believed, becomes reality. This is not about forcing belief. It's about falling into it. letting go of the need to fix the old story and simply walking into the new one. That's the assumption that hardens into fact. And the only reason the old story ever felt so real is because it was assumed to be. So assume again, quietly, deeply, permanently. No one else needs to understand this shift. No one else needs to agree. Because this change happens in the unseen, in the invisible space of identity. And from that invisible space, everything visible will begin to realign. The world doesn't need to be convinced. It only needs to be shown who you are now. That showing doesn't come from effort. It comes from being. Being the version of you who already has it. Who no longer checks the mirror for confirmation, but walks as if the reflection has already caught up. This is what it means to live in the end, not as a tactic, but as a truth, as a way of being, as a decision that doesn't need to be shouted, just embodied. The world always follows the lead of the one who knows. So no, not with tension, but with peace. Know it's done and live like it. That's the key. That's the shift. And it's always available. Now that this truth is clear, now that the power of assumption has been felt, the game is different. There's no need to wait for a sign. No need to look to the 3D for proof. That world is a lagging echo of yesterday's belief. And that means today's assumption is tomorrow's fact. So choose the new state, calmly. Not to get something, but because it's who you are. The rest will follow. It always has. It always will. Now that you understand why assumptions create everything, let's talk about why most people unconsciously sabotage their manifestations without even realizing it. Because the shift begins there. It starts subtly, with the habit of checking. Checking the phone. Checking the bank account. Checking their partner's reactions. All of it says, I don't believe it's done. Even if the words say one thing, the energy reveals another. And the universe doesn't hear words, it feels state. It responds to the dominant vibration, not the effort behind it. So when someone says, I'm abundant, but panics when a bill arrives, the true assumption is lack. And that is what gets mirrored back. Self-sabotage often looks like logic, like being realistic, like protecting yourself from disappointment. But all it really does is anchor you back into the old story. The moment you start entertaining doubt, trying to manage outcomes, or controlling the how, you've stepped out of the end and back into the waiting room. The good news, awareness is everything. The moment you spot it, the checking, the doubting, the needing, you're free to stop. You're free to pause, breathe, and return to the knowing, it's done. And that quiet, grounded return to the end is how you stay in the state where it must unfold. Are you ready to stop waiting for proof and start living in the end? Drop a comment below and let me know, what new assumption are you choosing to step into today?